if you were trying to do it in 4 years, what that would entail. Really, freshman year is about really exploring and trying to figure out like what things are interesting to you and sort of like making the sort of groundwork to what you're going to be doing for the rest of college, and definitely really concentrating and doing well in your class. With all of that, you have quite enough to work on. Sophomore year, so this depends on sort of what you might have gone into college with and what you're majoring in, but you can start working on your pre-med course requirements. If you haven't already joined some of those activities, this might be a good time to get started research, that you can really do that at any time, and start building connections with your professors and mentors, which again, you can start freshman year, but you will need letters of recommendation. So it is important that at least towards the like middle half of your college career that you're really like building connections with them. And the MCAT is something you can also start taking. It's somewhat like the standardized test in high school that like you don't have to take it at any particular time. Though I would say that it really helps. It's a hard test. It takes a lot of preparation. And I think it really helps to start thinking about at least when you want to do it ahead of time instead of waiting. I feel like for me, the best way that it worked out for me was, last summer I had not much to do. So I just studied during the summer and took it, which worked out for me just because I had nothing else to focus on. But also think about like, the subjects that are on the exam. Have you already taken them? That might make the studying time a little shorter for you. So there's a lot of things to consider. And if you guys have more specific questions, we can go into that. But that's another important part of the medical school application process. And so that's junior year. And so the timeline, like when you apply sort of like during the May to, like it starts as early as May that you start applying to enroll in the next year. So like if you're going to try to enroll like, let's say like August or whatever of 2022, you would be starting like this summer. So it does start a little bit earlier than high school. And so that's also something to think about, like what activities are going to actually be on your application when you apply. But mostly junior year stuff if you're not taking a gap year. And then senior year, you'll be like finishing your applications that would have started in the summer, and then interviewing and, keeping up with all the good work you've been doing so far, and, choosing which school you end up going to. So that's a very quick overview. Does anyone have any questions? You can just unmute yourself and ask.
What did you do so far in college for your medical school application? So
we sort of put like some general things that a lot of people do that we've also done. Personally, I've hospital volunteered. I also did some research in genetics, which is part of my major, but also like, relevant in terms of like the research thing I was talking about earlier. I think, let's see, I was also part of service organizations. Some of them were related to medicine. Some of them were just general service organizations. And one thing I would say is, this is always important, even in high school, but like really keep a record of what you're doing. When you do apply, they'll ask you like very specifically what hours you did, like how many hours a week, or like how many total hours. And so, instead of waiting for the last minute to like go back and figure out all of that, keep a track of it. And at the same time, the same way that there's essays and stuff for high school, there are lots of essays in the med school application process. And a lot of them really benefit from having like a particular story or like a particular instance that you want to talk about. So like when you're like, let's say you're volunteering in a hospital or doing research or really anything, if you have any interesting experiences, like write them down then, because you will forget them with everything else that's going on in your life. And that will really help you when you write your essays to have like specific moments to recall to, and just make your essays more interesting to read than like sort of a general like, oh yeah, I learned all these things. It's helpful to have like a nice narrative story to put in.
Yeah, and one thing to add to that, I know on our slide we have a lot of like medical clinical opportunities. Not all of your involvements in college need to be directly tied into medicine. So a lot of what I do is not directly related to medicine. I am we have this program called supplemental instruction. It's similar to TAing kind of. And so I'm just like a senior SI leader. As long as you can show that you are going to bring some sort of leadership or some kind of drive to the program, that's also a great way to structure what you're going to be involved in college. It doesn't all have to be like hospital volunteering. I would say clinical experience is definitely important. But if all you're doing is clinical experience, you don't want to get burnt out. You don't want to say, okay, I can't handle leadership in only clinical experience, because that can certainly happen. So definitely do things that you're also passionate about, because that is important. You want to be able to show up to your interviews and say, like, I'm a human being. I'm also a person.
Yeah, and also I think like in terms of like they're seeing so many students, like a lot of the times they're also like actually really interested in what you do outside of the clinic, because like lots of people will have these, pre-meds, a lot of them will hospital volunteer, do these things. So having like significant involvement in your other interests is also important, just to show that like even when you become a physician or in the medical field, that you have other things that you can also focus on, and that your whole life is not just everything involved in medicine. Any other questions or topics?
So I have heard a lot about grade deflation in the elite schools. Is that true? And like weed out colleges?
Well, I'll try to answer that. So I think, I'm not sure because I can only talk about my college. I know Hopkins is one that people do talk about that a lot about. And the other thing they talk about is the fact that like we do have a large pre-med population. So, that people are very competitive. I haven't really found that to be the case. I think it might have also been over time the changes that people have done. Before we had more classes that were graded on a curve, and like it made it hard for like more than a certain percentage of people to get an A or whatever. And now it's more just like, if you do well, like there's no restriction on how many people can get an A. It might be true that in some colleges it might be easier or harder to get a certain GPA. But thing is also that like even in our school, like there's certain majors that are definitely a little bit more intense than others. And typically, like even the medical schools, like will know sort of like similarly in high school, how they kind of give like when you get a letter from your guidance counselor, they will probably tell them like, what's the highest GPA in school, or like, situate you within the class. So while we don't have rankings or anything like that, like if you go to a certain major, like, a lot of them, it's kind of expected that they might have a slightly lower GPA just because it's so intense compared to like some of the other majors. So like medical schools tend to have an idea of that. But I think in terms of like your specific grades, it like in college, it really matters a lot about that specific class, the teacher who's taking it, like how much you're prepared and stuff. So like, I wouldn't say that even in a place that you might think is like, there's grade inflation, that all the classes will be super easy. It really depends like on your specific experience.
I see a question in chat which says, let's see, is there any BSMD programs in Texas? And I'm not sure of all of them, but I know that there are the Texas A&M Health Science Center College of Medicine, which is an 8-year BSMD, and also the Texas Tech Health Sciences Center School of Medicine, another 8-year BSMD in Texas. So those are two that I know of.
Yeah, I just sent a link in the chat that has a list of all of them. Should be comprehensive. And there was a question about how that application might differ. So applying to the combined programs is going to look a little bit different than applying just as if you were applying to college. I know, so VCU has a program that involves the BSMD program, and I know several applicants have to undergo the interview process similar to how you would have to undergo an interview process for getting into medical school. That follows what's called an MMI format. And so I encourage you all to do your own research on that, but you will be put under more of a rigorous application program. You'll definitely have to meet with admissions officers. You'll have to do interviews. You'll definitely have to specify why you're choosing to do this combined program, because they can be very challenging. and they are committing you basically to the program of medicine. So you're going to have to really be able to distinguish yourself and your commitment to medicine if you're applying to that kind of a program. But yeah, I would say that if you are interested in doing it, it could be well worth it. And a lot of these programs will ultimately give you certain requirements, certain course loads that you have to take, a certain MCAT score that you have to get. So those are all things to consider before you do want to apply to those programs. But yeah, I would highly recommend you do your own research on them. If you have any more questions, you can let me know.
So can you tell me about UNC Chapel Hill and Case Western PreMed program, if you know?
So I don't think any of us go to those schools, right? Yeah, so I would say it might be better to, if you're interested in finding out about those programs, you're always welcome to obviously check out the websites. And I would say one resource that's underutilized is actually reaching out to the school. I'm sure there's like most schools have what's called a pre-med advisor. You can probably talk to your pre-med advisors at that school. You can talk to admissions officers at that school, or they could put you in contact with alumni who are able to answer your questions. But unfortunately, I don't think any of us here have much experience with those programs.
Okay, thank you.
I saw one in the chat. Are there any pre-med facilities at your colleges that you found particularly useful so far or that you enjoyed? Yeah, I guess if you're pre-med, that's also a thing to think about when you're like choosing your colleges. I know for Hopkins, it is kind of helpful. Like our campus is not the same thing as the like Johns Hopkins Medical School, but it's very easy to get there. They have like a bus that goes there. So like a lot of people have benefited from that, in that you can do research there, you can volunteer there, you can like, if you want to do like anything you want to do at the hospital, you can easily do that. And so that's something you can also consider, like if you're going to a school that has affiliated medical school that's like close by, it could be helpful in that like this clinical experience that you want might be easier to access compared to like if you're going to like, especially if you're going to school like from a different place than where you live and you don't know much about the hospitals there or anything, it's helpful if there's like an affiliated one with your university. And there might be programs like we used to at least have this thing called medical tutorials, and they would like post it for all the pre-meds. And they're usually like research or like, shadowing or different projects that you can get involved in, but it's nice to have an affiliated medical school.
Yeah, I would completely agree with that. I think going to a school that has a medical school affiliated with it is a really great option for anyone who's pre-med. These doctors are used to having students around, so it's a little bit easier to get your foot in the door for shadowing. It's easier to get into research, and it's just easier in general to understand what that like the medical life is like. I have a lot of friends who are nursing students over at our medical campus. It's like kind of similar to Hopkins, where we have like a bus that takes you in between campuses, but you're able to see like your friends who are doing things there. You get a better idea of what it's like to be in a medical setting. So I would say that's like a huge consideration to really take on when you're looking at schools to apply to. Because it just makes everything a whole lot easier. Being pre-med is already difficult, and that's not to say it's necessary. You don't have to do that, but I would definitely say that it's a really good idea to look into that. Also, to answer the question, yeah, in the chat, we're sending out some resources after we get done with the actual question and answers. So the slide that I had talked about scholarships earlier, there's a link to merit scholarships, and I'm pretty sure for Duke, I want to say Duke has a program. It's a very limited number of seats, but I do believe they have a full ride scholarship program. I'm looking right now. So Duke offers 9 merit programs, which include full tuition scholarships, and I would recommend just going onto their website and looking for that. And Ashish already pretty much answered that, so good job, Ashish.
Thank you.
If there are any other questions, you can feel free to ask them. They don't have to be about being pre-med either. If any of you are curious about what it's like to be in college, I'm sure everyone would be happy to talk about that as well. If not, thank you guys so much for coming out and for sitting and listening and learning. We're really happy to be able to help you guys out.
And also, as mentioned on like the very last slide of the general presentation, if you do have a question that you think of later that you want to ask one of us, you can use that Austin Ekam chapter email and just put in the like subject that it's involving pre-med if it is, or anything, whatever it's involving. And then it'll get to us and we'll get you the response back.